So this is going to be the iPhone 14 Pro Max versus the iPhone 13 Pro, and I know it's not going to be a fair comparison just because they're different sizes, but it's still going to represent the best of the iPhone 14 Pro series versus the best of the iPhone 13 Pro series. So just comparing this generation versus last generation, and plus I can help you decide if you should get a Max or a regular size phone. But just also keep in mind that I'm still relatively new to iPhones. I've been using Android for the majority of my phone usage, so I'm still new to this whole Apple and iPhone stuff, so I might miss a couple things or I might overlook a couple things. So with that, let's just go ahead and talk about them. So starting off the design, from afar, you're definitely not gonna be able to tell that they're different or that they're new. So unless you're looking at like specific colors or small subtle things. So those small subtle things is one, the camera lenses on the 14 Pro series, they are a bit thicker now, which might not be a big of a deal, but if you use wireless charging, it is kind of annoying because when you go to set it down on a G wireless charger, so it doesn't have MagSafe, it's very hard to sometimes get the right position to be able to charge your phone. If you have MagSafe, it might help a bit because you use magnets, but on a regular G wireless charger, it can be kind of annoying. Plus, it rocks a little bit more on the table now, so honestly, it's not that big of a deal, but if you use wireless charging, it could be very annoying. And the next thing is that if you live in the US, you no longer have the SIM card slot, so that's another way you could tell that you have the new iPhone series. And the last thing is going to be the display itself. So one, if you look at it, you're going to see that the iPhone 14 series, at least the Pro series, is going to have the new dynamic island, and it's also going to have slightly slimmer bezels compared to the iPhone 13 Pro series. It's going to have the notch and slightly thicker bezels. But besides that, both phones still look overall pretty much exactly the same. You got a matte back, it's glass, it's a matte finish, so it's pretty comfortable and pretty soft feeling. It doesn't lead to a lot of fingerprints, but the sides do lead to a lot of fingerprints because you do have a glossy finish here. It's a flat stainless steel finish, which honestly, it looks pretty premium, and overall the phone itself looks pretty elegant, I'm not gonna lie. But I'm just not a huge fan of the design just because it leads to the edges being just a tad bit sharp for my liking, and the phones themselves are pretty slippery overall, so I definitely overall recommend using a case or at minimum a skin. I personally use dbrand's grip case, and it's expensive, but it actually is a very comfortable and grippy case for sure. And both phones are still pretty hefty overall, especially the Max size. So if you're not a big fan of big, heavy phones, then the Max is definitely not going to be the one you're gonna want to get. The 13 Pro or the regular size phone, the 6.1 inch device, is definitely more comfortable in the hand as far as one weight. It's a little bit lighter than the Max series, obviously, but it's still got a nice heft to it. But it's also smaller, so it's a little bit easier to reach across with one hand, especially if you have bigger hands, or if you have smaller hands, you're definitely going to prefer it on the iPhone 13 Pro size series or just the regular Pro series size versus a Max size, because it's definitely going to either be a gymnastic hand type of phone or it's going to be a two-handed phone. And both phones still have the same power button positions, volume rocker positions, and they both still have the mute switcher, and you have lightning at the bottom still. I was hoping for USB-C, but unfortunately you still have lightning on the iPhone 14 Pro series, and you both have really good speakers on both devices. These speakers sound so good that if you compare them to other devices that aren't iPhones, these definitely blow them out of the water. But overall, compared to each other, they both sound really good in my opinion. Both are IP68 water resistant rated as well, so if you get a splash of water, you should be just fine. But as far as the displays, I already talked about how the iPhone 14 Pro series now has a new pill cutout dynamic island with slimmer bezels versus the iPhone 13 Pro series that has still the notch and has slightly thicker bezels. So as far as those intrusions, how they get in the way, personally, I find both of them to still get in the way, like the notch versus the dynamic island. But I will admit that because I have the Max size, I feel like I notice it a little bit less. I feel like if I had the iPhone 14 Pro, the smaller version, then I might notice it a little bit more. But say you're watching a video, depending on the aspect ratio, the pill cutout or the dynamic island is definitely going to cut in and creep in a little bit more than the notch would. The notch just about creeps in a little bit, again, depending on the aspect ratio. Usually if you're watching a 16:9 aspect ratio, you should be fine. But if it's a wider aspect ratio, you're definitely going to notice that the notch and the dynamic island, more on the dynamic island, is going to creep in a little bit more, which is a little bit annoying. And once you pinch the zoom, that's going to be up to you to decide which you think is more annoying. Personally, I think both of them are annoying, but I definitely think that the dynamic island is more annoying just because you see a little bit of display on the edge, but it's kind of pointless because it's really not benefiting you. You still have a big pill cutout cutting off a lot of the video you're watching or whatever you're doing. But Overall though, like if you're just using it, not watching videos and just like browsing around, I personally think that both of them, you get used to them after some time. So personally, even though I wish they weren't there, you get used to them. As far as the actual quality of displays, both of them are going to be Super Retina XDR OLED displays with capability of going up to ProMotion with 120 Hz. Only difference there being that iPhone 14 Pro can go down to 1 Hz and the iPhone 13 Pro can only go down to 10 Hz. So maybe a little bit of a difference when it comes to battery life savings, but where it does make a difference is that allows the iPhone 14 Pro to introduce the always on display. Apple definitely took it seriously though when it came to the always on display. Your phone literally looks like it's always on, which is unique compared to the rest of the competition, those being the Android devices. So just because, that's how Android devices make their always on display, doesn't mean that's how you're always supposed to make an always on display. So I gotta give Apple props, that's unique. I may not like it and I'm not gonna use it, but it's still pretty unique. So just keep that in mind though, that the iPhone 13 Pro doesn't have that feature available. But as far as the size, you're going to get a 6.7 inch on the iPhone 14 Pro Max and a 6.1 inch on the iPhone 13 Pro. So as far as like a regular size versus a max size, personally, like I already said before, if you prefer a smaller, more portable, one-handed friendly device, the 6.1 inch is definitely a more one-handed friendly device, but you're going to get a bigger, more immersive display on the iPhone 14 Pro Max, or just the Max, I should say. So if you want a more immersive display and you prefer a bigger display, then get the max size. But if you want a more portable, easier to use, one-handed friendly device, then get a 6.1 inch Pro version. But overall, when you're just watching content or just scrolling around, it's gonna look very sharp, colorful, and smooth. Maybe not as colorful and vibrant as like a Samsung display, but still plenty good enough that it looks really good in my opinion. And both devices get plenty bright enough. I think the 14 Pro series can go up to a higher nits, so it can get brighter apparently, but honestly, it only happens when you're outside in a very bright sunny day. So both of them get plenty bright enough to the point that you shouldn't have any issue at all when you're using them outside. And you have Face ID in both of them, which is still fast, reliable, and secure. I think the only difference here is that on the iPhone 14 Pro series is that they're underneath the display now, at least some of the sensors are. And then on the iPhone 13 Pro, all the sensors are still in the notch, but still, even then, both of them are really fast and reliable. As far as the overall performance, you are going to get the A16 Bionic chip on the iPhone 14 Pro series with the A15 Bionic chip on the iPhone 13 Pro series. Both of them will have 6 GB of RAM. Is there a difference? Absolutely not. Honestly, both of them perform pretty much exactly the same. I think the only time you'll ever see a difference is if you're running a benchmark and you see the scores, you'll see one number is higher than the other one. That might be the only time you'll ever see a difference, because besides that, in your everyday usage, you're honestly gonna get great performance on both devices. So whether you're doing basic stuff, browsing one app at a time, or even doing a little bit more, such as using picture-in-picture, I definitely appreciate that picture-in-picture now works consistently. I had an issue before on the 13 Pro, might have been an iOS issue, but I wasn't super consistent, where sometimes it would work with picture-in-picture, sometimes it wouldn't. But either way, it's still great that I can watch a video and then browse another app, because usually that's the most I would do with multitasking on a device like this. If I want to do a little bit more than just that, then I would honestly go switch to a Fold, because I have a lot of fun multitasking on the Fold, but that's a different story in a different video. But either way, performance is going to be great on both of them. Even playing games, recording videos and stuff like that, that's like the only time, maybe after like a long period of usage, that you might get the phones warm up a little bit. Personally, I've never had these phones warm up, so I don't really push these phones to 100% limit, just because I don't really have the time to always play heavy games on here. So for me, my daily stuff is very simple stuff, and I'm honestly perfectly fine with what I'm doing on my devices. So for an average person, I think these are more than enough when it comes to the performance. As far as the software, you're going to be getting the exact same experience, that being iOS 16. I think right now it's iOS 16.0.2. So same features, same security, same privacy stuff, all that stuff will be exactly the same on both devices, except for one small software feature, which I'll get into in a little bit here. But the lock screen customization is pretty cool. I definitely admitted that it's nice that you can add a couple widgets. The depth effect is pretty cool. Only sucks that you can't keep widgets on there when you want to use that. Also like that you can choose which wallpaper goes with which focus mode, and the fact that if I have my sleep focus mode turned on at a certain time, it'll automatically switch to that wallpaper, letting me know that it's getting close to my bedtime, which I could just look at a clock for that. But either way, it's still another nice reminder letting me know, hey, it's almost time for bed. Even though you have nice lock screen customization, you still don't have a lot of good home screen customization, which I still find annoying, because I'm so used to Android that allows you to move apps and widgets freely anywhere on a display. Unfortunately, I can't do that here on an iPhone, so I'm kind of just trying to play with it and keep it simple with the stock settings that I have available. I know you can probably download a couple third-party apps or even use shortcuts and stuff like that to manipulate your home screen to make it, look like an Android device in a way, or customize it in a way like if it was an Android device, but I'm not going to go through that trouble. I'm just going to use the stock settings that I have available, and that's what I can do with it, so that's what I have. But besides that, home screen customization is still very limited. At least I have an app library though, even though I find it annoying because you can't make your own folders. Why can't I make my own folders? You gotta rely on iOS to put the app in the correct spot. For the most part, it does a pretty decent job, but sometimes I'll find and notice that some apps are put into folders that make no sense to me, or I wouldn't put in those folders. So I don't know, the app library is still there and pretty cool. You can turn it off if you want to, but personally, I like to keep it open or keep it on. You also have the ability to turn on bad tap or triple tap on the accessibility settings. So basically triple tap or double tap to bring down either the notification center or the control center. And I really like the notification summary. Basically, you choose which apps you don't want to constantly notify you when you get a certain notification, and then at a certain time that you select, it'll send you all those notifications into one summary instead of getting constant notifications all day from each app, which I find very convenient. But overall, iOS is very smooth when you're scrolling around. The animations are very clean in my opinion, and overall it's pretty simple to use. Unless you're coming from an Android device, then there is going to be a little bit of a learning curve. Some things are pretty different, so obviously I already talked about the customization, but also like the back button situation is a little bit odd. So sometimes there's some apps that do use a back button, or sometimes some apps do work with swiping from the left, but some don't. So it just depends on which apps are working with that and which ones are not. But as far as like bugs and stuff like that, I really haven't encountered many bugs on both devices. Granted, I don't do a lot of stuff, so the simple stuff seems to work just fine. The only time I ever did experience some kind of weird bugginess is when I was using picture-in-picture and playing Subway Surfers. I did notice that at first, like the first 30 seconds maybe, I did notice that the refresh rate went down a little bit. I don't think it's a hardware thing. I think it's more of an iOS thing, because after like 30 seconds, like I said, it goes back to being like a high refresh rate. And both of them, they're iPhones, so you still have that good Apple ecosystem stuff. So you have iMessage with now the ability to actually edit and delete text now with iOS 16. You also have FaceTime on that stuff. You have Find My Network, which is a very strong network if you lose your stuff. And you also have that seamless connection between either other people's Apple devices or your own Apple devices. So AirPods and Apple Watches all connect very easily and stuff like that. So you'll still have all that Apple ecosystem stuff. But as far as what's different when it comes to software, it's just going to be the dynamic island features. So that pill cutout does have some software implementations with it. So basically what that means is that some apps, if not most apps, are using some kind of feature with it. So for example, music and YouTube, if you're listening just to audio, it'll just go into the pill cutout there and show some audio waveform. And it's pretty cool because if there's like a quiet silent moment in the video or audio, it won't actually show waveforms, but once there's like a loud noise or something like that, or someone's talking, it actually kind of replicates the waveforms of that audio source, which is pretty cool. It also shows like an album cover art of whatever you're listening to, which is pretty neat. You can interact with it by holding it, or just by tapping into it to go into the app. Personally, I don't interact with it very often, so I could kind of say that I don't really use it. It's a cool feature, but I don't end up really using it much. It's just there, in my opinion. So it's cool, but I don't really use it. And I almost forgot, but you also have crash detection available and satellite connections available on the iPhone 14 Pro series now. So if you're now in a place that has bad connection and bad service, and you're in a bad situation, then you can easily communicate with a satellite tower or something like that and be able to get some help. You also have, like I said, crash detection, which hopefully you don't have to use that, but basically the phone can tell if you're in some kind of crash, and it can get help for you even if you don't respond. But overall, both of them will be getting you long support when it comes to software. I'm thinking about 5 years of the iPhone 13 Pro at this point, and maybe 6 years of the iPhone 14 Pro series. So honestly, that's more than enough time on both devices, which is props to Apple. That's really good in my opinion. As far as the cameras, I'm not a heavy camera user, so it might not make much of a difference to me, but there are some new hardware improvements here, that being the new 48 megapixel main lens on the iPhone 14 Pro series, and I believe the Ultra was also improved, and the front camera. But to me, I honestly don't notice much of a huge difference when taking simple photos. So the front, the only time I ever notice a difference is that if you get up close and personal, so if you plan on getting closer to your face, you'll notice that it can focus a lot better. So I guess it's got improved focal distance or something like that, or autofocus, whatever it is. Honestly, not that big of a difference because both of them still look really good. If anything, maybe the 14 Pro Max does look a hair sharper in detail, but otherwise both of them look really good for photos and videos too. So if you're filming videos, both of them honestly look very close to exactly the same. So front videos look really good in 4K. On the back, both of them again look very similar and very good in my opinion. I think there might be some subtle differences when it comes to the color. Like sometimes I noticed that the iPhone 14 Pro did look a tad warmer, but then the iPhone 13 Pro would look a tad warmer depending on the situation. So sometimes there was a bit of inconsistency between each other, not with like the rest of the lenses. So if the lens was warm in one photo on the iPhone 14 Pro, the rest of the lenses would stay consistent with that color, and same thing with the iPhone 13 Pro. It's just sometimes they would take different colors in my opinion. It wasn't like a huge difference, but just slightly subtle differences. Same thing with quality. Sometimes I noticed that both of them would like take weird quality looking photos. Sometimes they would look sharper on the iPhone 14 Pro, sometimes they would look sharper on the iPhone 13 Pro. I don't know, maybe it's just me. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to cameras, but to me, I think both of them look really good. You do have the ability now to use a 2x lens, which basically just means that it's cropping in on the 48 megapixel shot, even though it's already using binning, so I don't really know what it's doing, but basically, you have the ability to use a 2x now instead of trying to use the dial to get it at 2x now, so that's there if you want it, but both of them honestly take pretty good photos overall. And both of them are still capped out at 15x when it comes to zooming in, so you're not really getting improvement there as far as like the zoom capabilities. As far as nighttime photography, I think the iPhone 14 Pro does have a slight edge here. The photos look ever so slightly just a hair detailer and a bit brighter. Maybe not a huge difference, but I do notice a difference when I'm taking a couple photos and videos here. As far as video, both of them look pretty much exactly the same again. It might come down to the small differences, that being in like subtle detail when you're using the main lens and stuff like that. But honestly, overall, they look very similar in color, sharpness, and just overall quality. They both look really good. You also have the ability to use a new action mode on the iPhone 14 Pro, which is actually pretty cool. Basically, it really crops into your lens and stuff like that and really stabilizes the video. The only downside there is that you are capped out at 2.8K, so you can't use it in 4K, and you also need to be in pretty decent good lighting conditions, but it does a pretty good dang-on job of stabilizing the video. You can see a little bit of shakiness, but it's almost like you're using a little gimbal, and it's doing a really good job at stabilizing the video. And then as far as the max zooms, you are capped out at 9x, which both of them look pretty much exactly the same to me. No difference there, so not an improvement again when it comes to zooming in. If there was no improvement in photo, definitely no improvement in video. But overall, the camera systems are very similar to the point where if you already have the 13 Pro, you really might not see a big difference going to the Pro Max. If you're a professional, maybe you'll notice the differences because you get that Pro RAW stuff. Personally, I don't use that, but it's there if you want to use it. So really, if you have the 13 Pro, the camera system here, or if you choose the 13 Pro, the camera system here will still be plenty, if not still very good compared to the competition. As far as battery life, the iPhone 13 Pro is going to have a 3095 mAh battery, and the iPhone 14 Pro Max is going to have a 4323 mAh battery. So on paper, obviously the Max is definitely going to have a bigger battery life, but in reality, I feel like I'm getting about exactly the same battery life, if not just a tad bit better on the iPhone 14 Pro Max. So when I was using the iPhone 13 Pro, which was a couple months ago, honestly, I haven't used this device as my main device for a little while now. I've been stuck between the Fold and the iPhone 14 Pro Max right now. But at the time, I was getting about a day to a day and a half of battery life if I wasn't using it heavily, with about like maybe 3 to 4 hours screen on time. With that same screen on time on the iPhone 14 Pro Max here, I was getting about a day to a day and a half as well. So I was definitely getting maybe a couple more hours more compared to the iPhone 13 Pro, but not that big of a difference. So personally, I still think they're getting good battery life on both of them. And I think it's kind of questionable though that I'm getting about roughly the same battery life and they're different size phones with different size batteries. So it might be an iOS 16 thing. So I'm not entirely sure, but either way, I'm still able to get throughout my whole day without an issue. As far as the charging speeds though, both of them still take a decent amount of time. I think the iPhone 13 Pro maybe a little bit less time, maybe about an hour and like 20 or 15 minutes, with the iPhone 14 Pro Max taking about an hour and a half. So it definitely takes quite a while to charge up both devices, but because I get pretty decent battery life, it's not that big of a deal for me. Both of them also still have, wireless charging, no reverse wireless charging, but again, I want to emphasize that if you're using a G wireless charger, it might be a little bit annoying because of the bigger lenses where it might not be easy to place your phone easily on the wireless pad. But if you have MagSafe charger, then it might not that be of a big of a deal. So today, which one should you get, an iPhone 13 Pro or an iPhone 14 Pro? If the price gap is pretty big, I'm talking like $300 to $400 or more between the 13 Pro to the 14 Pro for you, then just go for a 13 Pro series. You're gonna get the exact same experience just for maybe a small touch of things that really won't make a big difference in your day-to-day life. unless you're all about that, latest and greatest stuff, then you know what you're about. And obviously just get the latest and greatest, because if you get the 13 Pro, you're going to be left thinking, oh, I should have just gotten the iPhone 14 Pro. It's the newest thing, Mentally, you'll be happier if you just get the iPhone 14 Pro. But for the more sane and common sense and your average person, yeah, just stick with the iPhone 13 Pro. So that goes for the person that also has an iPhone 13 Pro series right now. There's no need to upgrade unless you're only paying a couple $100s to upgrade. As far as choosing between a regular size or a max size, I've talked about this a couple times already in this video. Definitely will depend on what you prefer. If you want a more comfortable and portable, one-handed friendly device, go for the iPhone 13 Pro. But if you want the biggest device that you can get for a good immersive experience and you don't mind using two hands with this phone, then yeah, just go for the max size. I think it's a pretty, average big phone that most people would like to carry around nowadays. So otherwise, as far as choosing, I already paid full price for the iPhone 14 Pro Max, so might as well go with it and use it. But that's been it. Hopefully this helped. Hope you guys enjoyed, and peace.